UAE time. And for all of those, I think it's particularly an American holiday, Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving. Always enjoy that holiday when I was a student in the US, when it was sort of the one day a year when the sort of everything was secular, no religious holiday. Everything was just like, although its historic relevance, one might question now in the clear light of day, but it was a day in which it seemed all Americans could come together and celebrate, and still do. And I think in that sense, it's quite a nice holiday. I always enjoyed it. So best wishes to all the Americans who are enjoying that today. Brent crude oil trading down this morning in Asian trade, down over 1% again after yesterday's big drop on the news that OPEC Plus had postponed their meeting. A kind of a surprise. That's something I was, somebody I've been to about 100 OPEC meetings myself. I can't remember a meeting actually being postponed or derailed in this way. Maybe I'm just getting old and I can't remember things. But Daniel Rahmat, senior energy security consultant, is the only member of our cast this morning who sits in an OPEC producing country, although not part of this deal. What do you make of this agreement? It was always going to be difficult. Once you start fighting about quotas, that's something that's always a challenge in OPEC, and now OPEC Plus. That's not new. Your thoughts on this delay, if nothing else?
Hi, Sean. Yeah, the situation is get a little bit complicated because Iran and Venezuela have been out of quotas for a long time, and they're now increasing their production, especially. Venezuela had a deal with Americans to increase production, and there was some easing sanctions on Venezuelan oil. Also, Iran is increasing its production. Actually, the volume of exports of Iran is up and down, but the trend of Iranian production is steadily increasing. And so I believe there is some pressure in the other OPEC members, especially Saudi Arabia, which is solely considering itself responsible for keeping the prices and protecting the markets, as well as suffering the geopolitical threats recently facing with the conflicts around the region, and the threats for Saudi Israeli peace rapprochement through the recent geopolitical conflicts. If you look at the
just
latest,
to sort of focus on that point you made about the increased production now coming out of Venezuela and Iran has been the case all through the year. It was always going to be difficult to get the existing members of the agreement to align on new quotas, particularly the African ones who are struggling to meet their quotas. And there was a warning at the last meeting that they would have to get in line with reality. If they can't meet their quotas are going to have to be reduced. But one big question that will be facing the OPEC Plus countries as they sort of come around the virtual table is, will Iran continue to be able to produce at these levels? We've heard noises of sanctions coming back into play. Can Iran continue to produce and export at these levels with tighter sanctions coming in the new year? Your thoughts on that?
I do believe that Iran is going to even increase its production by March. The Ministry of Petroleum has sent news that they're going to increase production by March about 300,000 barrels per day, and that would, as I told you before, most of these oils are going to come from fresh oil fields, not the old ones. Iran has technology to develop at least its onshore oil fields, but maybe it has difficulties for keeping the level of production in the old oil fields. So by developing new oil fields, Iran is increasing production, is going to continue to do so. But there would be huge crisis for Iranian gas condensate, because Iran is facing very much difficulties with South Pars, the North Dome in Qatar, that to keep the level of the pressure of gas, which we are expecting a very sharp decline by 2025, and that would very much impact Iranian gas condensate production. And as you know, Iran is now almost consuming all its gas condensate domestically. so it's not going to affect the global markets. But regarding oil, crude oil, yes, Iran is going to keep the level of production and is going to increase it.
Let's go to Gulmira Razaeva, founder and managing director at Eurasia Analytics as compared to Eurasia Group. Gulmira, your thoughts on the demand outlook, the decisions that OPEC Plus has to face right now. A lot of supply coming from many places, including the United States, and yet demand outlook is weakening, China not coming back, and the forecast for Europe and elsewhere looking somewhat negative. Does OPEC Plus, in your opinion, have to make deeper cuts than they're currently making?
Yeah, I think despite some commitments coming from the OPEC member, let's say Russia to cut their production and export, for instance, Russia committed to cut for 300,000 barrels per day, but in fact, last month in October and this month, half of this month, Russia increased its oil export, especially to countries like Turkey, Asia, like China, India, and other countries. Kazakhstan also increased its oil production, export, and transit via Russia by around 500,000 ton. We see that, for instance, Russia promised to cut from May to September, but in fact, during this period of time, Russia increased a little bit, but also in October and November increased its oil export. Same goes for some other countries, as I mentioned, Kazakhstan. I think Azerbaijan was more or less on the same line, so no change on that side. But Iraq cut as well its oil transportation via Turkey. So this also this doesn't have much effect, but still we have some amount of oil out of the market.
What about the demand side? The demand side is clearly, I mean, all of this supply is coming into a weaker and weaker market. Let's go to Henning Gloystein for his thoughts on that. Henning, you're as Director of Energy, Climate and Resources, Eurasia Group. The other thing we're not seeing in the market at the moment to sort of help, if you want to use that word, help OPEC Plus, is the geopolitical premium. Despite the ongoing conflict in Gaza and Ukraine, the market seems unperturbed because of this big supply. Is that likely to continue?
Well, so I mean, the geopolitical premium that was definitely there briefly there, at least at the start of the war on October 7th and the following week. But I mean,
as it was at the beginning of the Ukraine war and then faded away.
Exactly, it faded away because even in the Ukraine war, what we've seen is a dislocation of oil supply, not a disruption of oil supply. There is now more oil in markets than it was at the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So the volume hasn't been drastically impacted. The flows of oil have drastically impacted because we're sending oil from Russia to India instead of Russia to Europe, and so these dislocations cost money. The situation in the Middle East is for the oil markets at this stage not quite as drastic because neither Israel nor Palestine are producers of oil in any form, so there has been no disruption, and there's currently no real terror about fear of this conflict spreading to a regional conflagration. Now, this might happen at some point, but this is currently not priced into the market. On the demand side, China's industry is underperforming. The United States industrial output is now contracting, and Europe's industry has been flat as a pancake for most of 2023. There is no demand growth. So we've heard what Gulmira is saying about Russian exports, Kazakh exports. We heard Daniel saying Iran is raising exports, Venezuela is producing more. And lest we forget, the United States is producing record amounts of crude oil now, 13.2 million barrels per day. That's an increase of more than 1 million barrels per day over the last year. So there's more oil in the market, whereas demand is flat at best. Now, I don't know why OPEC delayed this meeting. I really don't know. The only thing we heard is that they had.
Well, the reporting is that they can't get the Africans to. Well, this is according to reporting. There was a deal earlier this year that said that African producers would have a chance to still meet their quotas. Because they were failing to produce as much oil as their quotas through the year, and they never got to those levels. So my understanding and the reporting is that you failed to get to those production levels, so we have to reduce your quotas. That obviously hasn't gone down well.
Yeah, and the other thing is there's also reporting, like I said, I don't really know what's going on, but that OPEC got an incredibly bearish reading from the financial oil industry a few days ago, and that they basically scratching their heads a little bit and wondering what will happen and how this is going to go.
Well, there was some that we've seen the investment funds and the speculated money in the markets decrease dramatically over the last month. From some 600 million barrels of options down to, I believe, half of that amount. Daniel, speaking to the point of the Middle East crisis, Israel's invasion of Gaza, and the turmoil that has caused, there was speculation early in the month that this could spread. And you were one of the first voices, I remember, because expressing caution to that sort of view, because you had indicated that Iran are not necessarily showing an appetite here for getting involved. That appears to have been the right call on your part. Do you think that continues to be the case? They will not be sucked into a regional conflict? Daniel?
Sorry for the mic. I still believe so. Iran hesitates and has always been doing so, hesitating, getting into conflicts. Iran has created a network of proxies around the region and also allies, if you can't call all of them proxies, to avoid from direct conflicts. That's because of a lot of several types of reasons, including the type of Iranian military. Iranian military has not been renewed for a long time, for 4 or 5 decades, and it's been focusing and emphasizing on strategic missiles and strategic weapons that would not let you get into a direct, not an all-out war type of clash. Iran would immediately be dragged into a big scale war if it wants to get into one. So I believe that Iran hesitates getting into a full scale war. Iran would prefer its proxies to fight on behalf of it instead of directly getting involved.
Reporting that I've seen is that in the start of this conflict, Hamas's action, that the Iranians were not briefed on that. And having been not briefed or not given the option to veto it, they expressed and told Hamas that you're on your own now. You called this without our advice. You got to deal with the consequences. That's some reporting I'm seeing on that amongst the reasons why Iran wouldn't be drawn into this.
Yeah, I don't have enough. I cannot confirm.
Of course, this is all sorts of reporting. Yeah.
Right. But technically, I do not believe that Hamas has 100% independence from Iran.
Well, there is the immediate. I think the general knee-jerk reaction from global, geopolitical both leaders in Western capitals as well as analysts, etc. The immediate sort of narrative is, Iran's going to get sucked in. Iran is, it's like as if it's an automatic, and clearly there's many aspects to Iran's geopolitical posture, and automatically being sucked into something like this does not feature as a 1 and 1 is 2. And I think that's something that in the Western capitals, they don't quite capture, that there's many things in this equation at the moment. Let's move on to Gulmira, because Gulmira, one thing that is getting overlooked at this particular time, for all the reasons we've been talking about, serious conflict in Palestine. Obviously, the Ukraine conflict goes on. But meanwhile, Azerbaijan and Armenia are still wrestling each other into some element of trying to find a negotiated peace, a negotiated alignment. Tell us a little bit, update us of why we've all been distracted. What's happening in Armenia and Azerbaijan after the recent conflict?
Well, I think a lot of things happening in this region, because it goes beyond just this region and Armenia and Azerbaijan, because some major powers are also involved here in this region, including, well, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, by default, because they are the countries in this region. But also we have Europe, especially France, the US, that are actively trying to either facilitate or just trying to enter this region with some of them with some representatives, calling them observing mission, or increasing number of the staffs in the embassy in case of the UK, etc. So
and Israel, of course, Israel very much involved and very close to Azerbaijan.
Yeah, that's true. Azerbaijan has had quite a very strong military, cooperation with Israel. But I think it also goes beyond this military, relations. It's I think much more than that.
Now, they were all due to have a sit-down peace talks in Washington last week that fell apart. What was the situation there, and what's the update?
This is because since the war was ended back in 2020, so one of the commitments of Armenia, which signed that declaration or agreement between Armenian Prime Minister, President Azerbaijan, and Putin, it was that a next step is signing a peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia to put to an end this 3 decades of hostility. But as of today, we don't see any move from Armenian side to sign that peace agreement. So that caused obviously threat to the region, because Armenia keep buying some military, ammunitions from different countries, and the thing is that US being not fair in its facilitation role between Armenia and Azerbaijan, clearly and openly, demonstratively, even showing huge support, political support to Armenia. And I think that was the reason why Azerbaijan, didn't accept the invitation to continue this peace talks in Washington. Washington is one of the platform where these two countries, constantly have had these talks, negotiations on this peace agreement. So another platform, so Brussels, Moscow, Sochi. So the same we can say about France has been very biased and not, at least not neutral in this facilitation role. So that, I think that was the reason why Azerbaijan declined its invitation to meet in Washington, to use this platform as the platform for peace talks.
Henning, your thoughts on that question now? OPEC Plus, obviously you would imagine the phones are ringing off the hook around the 20-odd countries that are tied to this agreement, dependent heavily on the heavy bucket that Saudi Arabia has been carrying with that extra unilateral voluntary 1 million barrel a day cut, which of course has delivered all producers an 80+ oil price over the last 5 months since the big drop in June. Your thoughts on how that plays out, and does OPEC Plus need to make deeper cuts than what they're currently offering in this quarter as they go into the first quarter of the year? That the outlook to balance the market, to create a tighter supply-demand balance and get 80+ on Brent through the first quarter, they're going to have to do more than just roll over. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we've been saying for quite a while that at the very least, they're going to have to roll over it probably for the first half of next year. But indeed, if the slowdown of the economy, especially in the sort of the big three consumer regions, Northeast Asia, Western Europe, and North America, continues, and they do indeed want to maintain a price of $80, they'd probably have to cut more. And the question is a little bit of how deep is especially Saudi Arabia really willing to cut. I mean, 9 million barrels per day is not something I think they like to do. And if they want to go lower from here, I mean, at some point, you must ask, how long do they want to cut? How long do they want to withhold supply? If everyone else, it's a very old question for OPEC on Saudi Arabia. How long do they want to withhold while others like the US, like Brazil, can just raise their supply and enjoy these high prices created by Saudi Arabia? It's a very uncomfortable position they're in. But of course, that is, if you're the margin on the swing producer, that is your role. And I don't envy them in their current position.
Yeah, it was kind of once you've gone the 1 million barrel a day voluntary cut, it's hard to unwind it when the market is built so much around it in terms of its structure. Let's go to the survey question, which of course is dealing specifically with that point. Will OPEC Plus find agreement to make deeper oil supply cuts in Q1? That's of course what you would imagine they're negotiating off camera in this window ahead of this rescheduled meeting, which is supposedly going to be next week. And will OPEC find agreement? We all remember ahead of COVID, or right at the beginning of the COVID window of 2020, they failed to find agreement and everything fell apart, and so did oil prices. And then, of course, with the extra downward draft of the COVID pandemic, they went through the floor, and famously WTI went negative. But there is history of failing to find agreement and everybody going their separate ways for at least a brief period. But on this occasion, the question is, will OPEC Plus find agreement to make deeper oil supply cuts in Q1? A yes or no, views in the room. Daniel, you did mention there in your opening comment, of course, that Iran and Venezuela, but also Libya, have not been subjected to OPEC quotas for some time for all the obvious reasons. When or ever do you think, or what would be the position of Iran towards this idea that other supply is coming back? Would they expect what is happening, that Saudi Arabia would reduce, that others within OPEC would reduce in order to make room historically for the likes of Iran and Venezuela to come back? At the end of the day, both countries used to produce a lot more oil than they do at the moment.
There is something. Look, if Saudis do more cuts, if Saudis decrease their production more, they might permanently lose part of their market share. At the same time, they have long-term contracts with China, India, etc. So they need to supply at least a certain level of oil. There is a third point we need to consider. When Saudis were producing at the maximum level, they had no leverage in markets, but cutting production. But at the moment, they have another leverage. They can go to a price war with the others through increasing the level of their production. So cutting Saudi barrels has offered them the so-called lollipop is the sort of weapon that now the Saudis have. Now they can increase their production. They can break the back of Iran and Russians again. So I think it's very complicated if Iran does not consider the sensitivity of the issue. If Saudis want to increase their production as much as they can break the prices, and then nobody is going to buy Iranian sanctioned oil, because at least all Iran and Russians have is the discounts they can offer to China and India, in the case of Iran, to Chinese. So Iran has sold a big portion of its floating reserves during the time that other members have reduced the production, and that would be considered, I cannot call it a betrayal, but a sort of using the chance as much as possible. But it's not going to continue forever. But the problem is, what is the mechanism of controlling Iranian oil outputs Iran has to use every moment to sell its oil because there is no guarantee for selling the oil in the next day. So it would be a very complicated thing, and that there should be a trust between Iran and Saudis if they want to get to a sort of conclusion. And at the moment, I believe that the two sides lack such sort of mechanism because Iran does not want anybody to look how it's bypassing the sanctions. At the same time, there is no real mutual trust between Iran and Saudi. So it would be hard, but there should be a conclusion, because if they don't, especially Russians, if they don't make a deal with Saudi is not going to tolerate every pressure, every burden to control the prices, and then they're going to increase the production, which, as I told you, they couldn't do so.
Of course,
last year.
and you would imagine that Saudi Arabia takes the weight of the burden over the last 6 months, because they expect when certain moments like this arrive that they will be able to move the strategy forward with the cooperation of others. Otherwise, why would they carry that burden?
The Emiratis and Iraqis have already started increasing production, according to OPEC.
I mean, it is a difficult window because there are countries that have invested a lot of money in new capacity and obviously want to put that to work. And then there are countries like the African countries, for many reasons, obviously the lack of capital and so forth, haven't invested in that new production capacity. And somehow that circle is going to have to be squared. Gulmira, I wanted to get your views and move on to the situation with gas. I know that's something you watch very closely, and we haven't had you on in recent weeks or months since we've seen all of these deals between Qatar and Europe. What does that mean for gas coming out of Central Asia, coming out of Azerbaijan? We had discussed in earlier talks that maybe more gas could come out of Central Asia to help Europe, but now Qatar has jumped into that, and at the same token, it would appear demand is dropping in Europe, and they're well taken care of. How do you read the situation of European gas demand and the supply coming now from Central Asia versus Qatar?
Well, I think demand in Europe will continue dropping in the following seasons and years, because for that a number of measures and mechanisms has been put forward by the European Commission in Europe, and it seems that it's been quite successful so far. All these endeavors to cut demand in Europe in the market, and with Qatar agreements, I think the important thing here is the length of these agreements, because all of them are long-term agreements. Not all, but most of them are
long-term, being over 20 years.
Over 20 years, and a few of them are 27 even years. For instance, agreement with Total, with Shell and others. But yeah, they have an equity share in those fields. But still, it's quite surprising to see this long-term contract, which goes beyond 2050. That the year of pledge of many European countries and even companies, to go net zero emission. So as you may know, Azerbaijan is in the talks with the European potential buyers to expand its gas export to Europe, to double it from 10 to 20 BCMA, but most of them are, a decline or are cautious to sign long-term contracts with Azerbaijan to receive pipeline gas from the region, and maybe in the future from Turkmenistan as well. And this obviously has enormous effect on success of this project, because money matters. You have to give the market guarantee, demand guarantee, etc. And without those long-term contracts, it would be extremely difficult to find loans, from international banks and financial institutions as well. So I think the next few months or next year or two will be very, very interesting to observe how this will develop in the future going forward.
Henning, last word to you. I wanted to get your thoughts and insights on the sort of growing narrative, with the Israel-Palestinian conflict in Gaza, the it's taking a lot of headlines away from the Ukraine war, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and occupation of Ukraine, and combined with what is a growing story of the Western fatigue after it's been creeping a while, and now without this success of the recent surge or the expected surge of Ukraine on the battlefield. What are your thoughts on the outlook for through the winter into the new year, that this fatigue, this Western fatigue with supplying and financing and the Ukraine conflict and compelling Kyiv towards an agreement, a peace and a concession?
So the winter outlook on the conflict in Ukraine is grim. Sadly, that's not really changed since I was last on here. It looks like a stalemate. It looks like the winter freeze is going to happen again, and it's going to cost a lot of lives. Now, in terms of the fatigue, that's definitely a true point. In the United States, there's congressional spending willingness for new dollars for Ukraine is in doubt. And in Europe, there's a bit of a problem with the German budget mess when the Constitutional Court declared half of, I don't know exactly half, but significant volumes of German government financing for illegal, which includes some military and some defense spending, which will impact probably Ukraine as well. So there is a risk of a military financial fatigue here. This is an interesting as from a Ukrainian point of view, a scarier prospect, because if Ukraine can't tap a significant new Western finance over the next, let's say, 6-8 months, it's less the question of will Trump or Biden win the presidency and who will be president in January 2025. But then the situation on the ground in Ukraine might change by spring next year quite significantly, probably not in favor of Ukraine. However, that said, does not mean, Western fatigue doesn't mean that this can't be revitalized, that new money can't be made available.
Does Europe have the capacity to carry the bucket without the US if US was to downgrade? I mean, the US has been carrying the heaviest bucket so far, but would Europe be willing, be able to fill that gap?
Not totally, no. I mean, they can up their finance and they could probably finance a continued stalemate, but as I said, a stalemate costs a lot of lives and doesn't lead anywhere. So no, Europe can't fully replace US efforts to support Ukraine. Not realistic.
Well, we'll have to wrap it up there. I am wondering, does such an there's the survey question. No, will OPEC find agreement by a small majority in this room? At least no. We'll post that on social media and get a bigger response as to whether that's what the view is on that. But I'm scratching my head to think as to if there was a fatigue and the West and the US were to back away from Ukraine or sort of push it towards a concession agreement with Russia, whether that would be bullish or bearish for oil markets. Would it create stability or instability? It's kind of a Rubik's Cube that needs a bit of thought. But nonetheless, we need to wrap it up. Our half hour is over together. Daniel Rahmat, thank you so much as always, checking in from Tehran. Gulmira Razayeva, thank you for joining us today. I believe you're in London, and Henning Glostein, of course, also in Europe. Thank you so much. Or Gulmira, maybe you're in Azerbaijan today.
I am, yes.
Yes,
today.
you are. Okay, sorry, I got that one mixed up. Henning's in London, and Gulmira is in Azerbaijan, and Daniel is in Tehran. We like our global cocktail here. Have a great week, everybody, and certainly lots to keep an eye on. Thank you so much. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.